ever given a lame excuse not to go somewhere? Have you? You'll be real with me? Thank you. Thank you for being real. Yeah, I have too. I've given lame excuses many times not to go places that, to be quite honest, I didn't want to go. In fact, one of the best times in my life to be able to give lame excuses was when my son Tucker was born. Because when you got a little infant baby, it's the best excuse ever, right? You just be like, oh man, I would absolutely love to go to your daughter's first grade piano recital. However, baby's sick, baby's sick. And so I can't go. I don't want to go to that recital, but baby's sick. Baby ain't even got to be sick. Baby could just look like he's thinking about maybe being sick sometime this week. And that'll work, right? And they believe you. It's crazy. They believe you. I used it a lot for a season. The only problem is when he's like 10, 11 years old, it just don't work no more, Like, no, we gotta go. But I have given my fair share of lame excuses not to go places that I did not want to go. And I'll tell you, because I've given a few, I also can smell lame excuses when they come my way. You know what I'm saying? Invite people to do something, or here's an opportunity. And they be saying, well, I would love to, but no, you wouldn't love to. It smells like an excuse. It smells like you don't want to. And you've had it happen to you. You've invited people to your brunch. You've invited people to parties. You've invited people to get together. And then you can just smell in their response. They can type their response and you can smell it. It don't matter. You can smell in their response. This is a lame excuse for you not to come. People have been offering lame excuses to God for a long, long time. He extends an invitation to his party. He extends an invitation to come be a part of what he's doing. He extends an invitation to people, and he's extended it for all of time. And people have done a very good job of coming up with very lame excuses as to why they don't want to participate in his party. And today I would like to draw your attention to a collection of these lame excuses that Jesus sort of told in story form in Luke chapter 14. Now, in Luke 14, just to give you a little background on what's going on, Jesus gets invited, oddly enough, to a party. As a prophet who was a traveling sort of individual who had built up quite a bit of notoriety in a short time, people would invite him into their home. When they hear that Jesus is going to be in a particular town, the people who throw parties in that town would call all their friends who they invite to all their parties to come over, and they would have this big, fabulous meal because the prophet was coming through. They didn't just do this for Jesus, they did it for all of them. But Jesus is at a particular party, and there are all these political officials there. There are all these religious leaders there. They're, the mayor, the governor, the whomever. Like, if you was somebody, you was going to be there. And they were there to always question the prophets, question these teachers, because they knew that they were gaining influence. And what they wanted to figure out was, would these men of God say what they wanted them to say? Y'all thought this was like a new thing. Y'all thought that the swamp and special interest and all this kind of stuff was some new idea. No, this was going on in Jesus' day. This is literally what they did. And they would try to, if they could, pay off the prophet. They would try to, if they could, kind of coerce the religious leader that, hey, we really would like it if you would think about this like this. So they'd ask him a bunch of questions around dinner and, the party and an after party and the after party. They ask him all kind of questions and just trying to figure out where they sat. And in the middle of all of this, Jesus breaks into a story that surprises them. And here is his story in Luke 14, starting in verse 16. This is what it says. Jesus telling a story. He says, a man was giving a large banquet. Now, just again, this is Jesus telling a story. This did not really happen, but yet it leans into things that really could happen. A man was given a large banquet, and he invited many. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who were invited, come, because everything is now ready. But without exception, look at this line, they all began to make excuses. And you'll see these excuses were sorry. The first one said to him, I have bought a field and I must go out and see it. I ask you to excuse me. Another said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm going to try them out. I ask you to excuse me. And another said, I just got married. Therefore, I am clearly unable to come. So the servant came back and reported these things to his master. Then in anger, and I would like to put in parentheses, the master responded in grace. See, we get this messed up sometimes. Sometimes if you've heard this story before, you think this master is real angry. No. In anger, he's moved to do something incredibly gracious. And this is where the story turns. And then in anger, the master of the house told his servant, go out quickly into the streets and the alleys of the city and bring in here the poor, the maimed, the blind, and the lame. Those people were named on purpose. Master, the servant said, what you ordered has been done, and there's still room. Then the master told the servant, go out into the highways and the hedges and make them come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you that not one of these people who are invited will enjoy my banquet. Now, you picked up on the first one, but I need you to know that all three of these excuses that Jesus sort of lobs out there were completely ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. And everybody gathered around him at this little party that was listening to him tell this story, they understood that these are some dumb excuses. They all understood it. All of them. Because nobody in that day would buy a field without seeing it. Now, maybe today people like to drop in their lyrics how they buy private islands they ain't ever seen. Okay, that's fine. But in that day, nobody would buy a field that they hadn't laid their eyes on, because their ability to augment the soil and augment the growing conditions is just not the same thing that we can do today. They could not have run an irrigation system to be able to bring more water if it didn't get enough rain. They had to take a look at where the sun was in certain times of the year. They had to test the quality of the soil, because remember, this is the Middle East. They're in the desert. So if you're going to buy a field, I want to put my eyes on it. I ain't just trusting what you will say and your little MLS listing like on LoopNet. No. I'm going to need to see this field. It was ridiculous. And then the second one says, well, I've bought these oxen that I'm going to use to plow a field. That's why you would buy a yoke of oxen. The thing is that there is no way you would buy oxen without giving them a test drive in advance. I mean, think about it real practically now. Would you buy a used car without taking it for a test drive and giving it a little look over and a listen? No. Why? Because you don't trust the people selling it. I feel you. But the main reason is you need to see if things are in alignment. See, the way you would actually plow a field is you would put a couple of these oxen side by side. And they're going to have a certain pace and a certain gait. And if one of them was like a speedy oxen, and it's just moving around like real fast, but then another one is kind of a slow oxen. He's strong, but he's slow. The problem is when you go out to plow your field, you ain't going to plow in a straight line. You're going to plow in circles. And so there was no way in that day anyone would ever go buy a bunch of oxen and not have tested them first. And then the last excuse for a long time I actually thought was like substantial, right? Listen, Jesus, I just got married. You know what I'm saying? I'm busy, if you know what I'm saying. But yet culturally, that was actually the most egregious, the most slap in your face kind of excuse to the master. Because in that society, they had a very, very low view of women. And so women actually weren't mentioned or brought up in public conversation ever. And so to actually mention that he had a wife was bringing shame not only to his wife, but also saying that this person who in our society has no importance is actually of more importance to me than you and your little party. It was shameful. It was, I don't want anything to do with you and your stupid little party. That's what the third guy said. So maybe that gives you a little understanding as to what's going on as Jesus tells this story, because there would have been this clue that everybody would have picked up along the way that maybe you and I miss. Culturally, as Jesus is giving these examples of, I don't want to come in, your party is dumb, the people listening would have understood what was happening among these people. See, if something like this happened, here's the reason it would have happened. It would be done to end the party. If this had transpired in real life, what would have been happening is these people would have heard about the invitation. They said, man, I ain't going to that dude's house. I ain't going to that stupid party. Why does he think that matters? What's he all about? He's about some stuff that I ain't really about. So I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's not go. Let's make him look dumb. Okay. I'll give the excuse that I just got married. Ooh, that's good. I'm going to tell them I bought a field and I ain't even looked at it yet. Ha! You know, like they concocted these excuses in order to shut down the party. Why would they want to shut down the party? Maybe they would want to shut down the party for any number of reasons, but there are reasons sort of implied here. And so Jesus then turns this whole story on a dime when he starts talking about how the servant came back and reported these things to the master, and the master responded in anger-filled grace. See, if he was just really angry, do you know legally what he could have done? He could have had all these people thrown in jail. Believe it or not, he could have. Parties were a big deal back then. He could have legally, because they were trying to embarrass him. They were trying to slander him. They were trying to shame him. And in a culture built on honor, this is one of the lowest things you could do. So the master in this party is full of anger, but chooses to respond and let that be the energy with which grace is extended. And he offers grace to a group of people that would have shocked those listening to him, that Jesus, this great storyteller, Jesus, this prophet, Jesus, this man of God, would even be concerned about. Have you ever been surprised at somebody else's progress? Like, maybe somebody you knew from like back in the day, you know, back when you were in middle school, and all of a sudden you see them now, and here they are now, and she is like an executive in a company, like a suit wearing. I got a little entourage following me around wherever I go just to write down my little notes and my little thoughts and my little emails, and she is like serious now. And you see her now, and she's in this like serious position of honor and this serious position of value in this company, but you remember being in middle school and doing her homework for her. You know? And you're like, look how far you've come. Like it's shocking. Or maybe some dude you knew from high school, and he was ugly in high school, you know? And it's like, how's that dude ever gonna get a date? And then you stumble across him on Instagram, and you find that he's dating a girl right now, and that girl is way out of his league because he is still ugly and she is not ugly, you know? And you're like, how? That feeling of shock that hits you is the same kind of feeling these people that were listening to Jesus' story, that were leaning in, it's the same kind of shock they were feeling when he says, the master of the house looked at his servant and says, servant, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go to the poor people, to the lame people, to the maimed people, to the blind people, and they are the ones I want here at my party. Why was this shocking? It was shocking because God was doing what God does. He elevates people. You see, God will elevate people that society will depress. God will elevate people. God will lift people. God will see the value and believe in people that society will try to depress. And this group of people categorically was a group of people in that society was trying to depress. So much so that these people were not even allowed in and around the normal activities of daily life. Like if you were poor, you didn't really live in the city. You lived outside the city and had to come into the city to get what you need. Had you been blind, maimed, or lame, people wouldn't look at you or touch you. They wouldn't touch you because they had this thought when it came to how these people got these diseases, they could be transferred like people transfer cooties. You remember cooties being transferred around your little elementary school? How does cooties get transferred? By touch, right? And they literally believe that if I touch somebody who's blind, I can't see no more. If I touch somebody who's lame, all of a sudden, well, then there goes my walking. You know, like they believe that this is the way these things actually transferred. So they excommunicated them from life around other people, and they had to live outside of the city. Which meant when there were parties going on, they didn't come to the party. Which meant when there were religious services, times at the synagogue, they didn't go to the temple. Which meant that when people would gather together, when big decisions were being made, big announcements being made, they heard passed down information way after the fact because they were never allowed to be around others. And in their political writings, even in their religious writings in those days, this group of people were literally listed as they're listed by Luke here, as a group of people who were pushed out. And Jesus says that the master decided, these are going to be the very people I'm going to bring into my party. The people that other people have said there's no value in, I see their value. The people that society has said they are uninvited, I invite them. The people who've said there's no way they can have a place at the table, I'm going to make a place at the table for them. That's our God. That's the way Jesus looked. And so he's in this party and they're trying to figure out where he stands on some things. And he tells them this story that's kind of confusing to them because this does not follow the way the system is set up. See, the system was set up that the people who go to banquets are people who are valuable, quote unquote, to society. The people who go to banquets are the people who have, quote unquote, influence. The people who get invited to parties are, watch me, people who can be invited back to parties. See, what would happen in that day is if I'm throwing a party, the first people I would invite would be people of influence. Why? Because I want them to invite me to their party when they have a party. So I'm going to invite them to my party, expecting that they'll invite me to theirs. Which may not sound all that troubling on the surface. There's only one problem. If you don't have the ability, if you don't have the means, if you don't have the influence to have a party or throw a party, what are you supposed to do? Never go to a party. And so Jesus really turns the knob when he says that the ones that the master is now going to invite are those who never get invited. Which got me thinking about this thing I read in the early part of this year. There's a research company known as the Barna Group. And they do a lot of statistical research when it comes to faith and what that faith practically looks like. And they compile these massive surveys and they deduce it into data that's helpful for church leaders or helpful for people who are concerned about spiritually what's going on in a particular part of the world, what's going on in their city, what's going on in the country, whatever. And they came out with this report at the beginning of the year, and it's a fascinating report to me. You would not necessarily care, but it's fascinating to me because this is the world I live in. And it had this section that dealt with invitations to church. Because see, I believe that church is a party. I believe that church is a celebration. These gatherings, when we come together, we're celebrating the goodness of God, celebrating his faithfulness, celebrating his concern, celebrating his work in our lives. We're celebrating this. And so it had this interesting finding that it shocked me, and then it didn't shock me, and then it depressed me. The finding went like this. They found that for people that go to church regularly, which their definition of regular was at least once every 2 months. So some of you are like, yes, I'm regular. Welcome. You know, that was their finding. But if they found that people who go to church regularly, again, once every 2 months at least, that 67% of them over the course of a year, 365 days, 52 weeks, right? Over the course of a year, that 67% of people would invite one person to church with them, at least. That means that 2/3 of people that go to church regularly, again, regular being once every 2 months at a minimum, would invite at least one person to church in the course of a year. And I got to be honest, I was a little shocked by that. I thought, honestly, that number would be lower. I thought that the number might be, I don't know, maybe in the 35 to 45% range. And so when I see that 2/3, 2 out of every 3 people who attend church regularly actually invite someone to church over the course of a year, at least one person, I was like, that's interesting. And then I kept reading and it all made sense and it also depressed me. Because what they found is that in these 2/3 of people who invite people to church, that the majority of them, almost all of them, invite people who are already connected to a church. You say, how many? 98% of them. In fact, for people who are regular in church, which means that they go at least once every 2 months, they found that only 2% of those people over the course of a calendar year will invite at least one person who does not go to church at least once every 2 months. So maybe someone that goes at Christmas time, or maybe someone that just hadn't been to church ever, and that idea is just completely disconnected from their life, that only 2%. And that depressed me. And it made me a little mad. Because it's like, what are we doing? And then it dawned on me. Maybe we're doing this parable. Maybe what we're doing is we are inviting people who can invite us back, rather than inviting those who never get invited. Maybe we consciously or subconsciously invite people to come in who are already in somewhere else in hopes that one of two things will happen. Either they'll like where I'm a part of more, and so my friend is here now, and I feel like I brought somebody new, or when they have something special going on at their place, they'll invite me there. You say, that doesn't make any sense. It makes perfect sense. And some of it is what Jesus was getting at. He was saying when you invite, you don't invite just to be invited back. That's the way people do their parties in general. But he's like, this is not the way it's going to be in my house. Because you do know how these roles break down in this story, right? I mean, the master here is clearly a like this figure representing God. And the servant, you know who the servant is, right? I feel like I'm Remember the Titans. You know who your daddy is. You know who the servant is, right? The servant is you and me. We are God's servants. If you're here and you have a faith in Jesus, let me tell you, what we are in this story is we are his servants. That's what you are. You are his servant. You are the one who gets to be a part of preparing the party. And this gets to go out and communicate the invitation to those who we're supposed to communicate to. And then we're the one who carries the master's heart to go and invite and reach and bring those who never get invited. That's what we are. And if you're here and you have a faith in Jesus, can I tell you, that is what God sees you and your role at in this story. And so there's a calling on our lives. There's a calling on our existence. And if you have a faith in Jesus, guess what? You're his servant. And his servant has responsibility. There are things that he expects us to do. Write this down if you're taking notes today. Jesus calls us to pursue the overlooked. Jesus calls us to pursue the overlooked. That is exactly what the master tells this servant to do. What I need you to do is I need you to go and I need you to target people who are poor and who are maimed and who are blind and who are lame. I need you to target them. I need you to go and bring them here. See, there's this escalation in language that we don't necessarily pick up completely on that happens in the story. That when the master gives the encouragement to the servant to go tell the people who were invited originally, it's just this idea of informing them. Yo, it's ready. It's time. It's like you're hungry and mama says dinner's ready. And you ain't got to coerce people. You need to put down that video game. If you hungry, it's dinner time. It's like, I'm done. Let's go. I don't care. Kill me on Fortnite. I don't care. Like I'm out because I'm ready. It's just this informing. But then when the servant was sent to the poor and the maimed and the blind and the lame, there was this idea of this invitation with a sense of urgency behind it. Again, it doesn't necessarily pick up in translation from Greek and Aramaic into English today, but there's a lifting of urgency. And then, in the end, when the master sends the servant back out one more time and tells him to go to the highways and hedges and compel them to come, make them come. We see it a little bit there, but there's this idea of you're supposed to do whatever it takes to let them know they are welcome and wanted at my party. Take them by the hand, drag them up in here. You do what you got to do. because that's our calling. Jesus calls us to pursue people who are overlooked. You know, there are overlooked people when it comes to faith in our world right now. There are people that you overlook, people that I overlook. And sometimes it's not even maybe with the nuance that Jesus plays in this story because of cultural or religious or political strings attached to it. Sometimes we just overlook people who are close to us. Sometimes we overlook people that really need Jesus simply because they live next door to us. We overlook people who really need Jesus just because, well, they're our boss, and I mean, they run this company. They make a lot of money, so they fine, you know? We overlook them because we're related to them. We overlook them because we've known them for a long time. We overlook them because we think they're the type who would never come to church. We overlook them. And Jesus calls us to pursue the overlooked. And then he also calls us, and there's this implication in his encouragement that looks like this. He also calls us to overlook the problems. You know, because there are problems involved in bringing, in inviting, in compelling people to come to God's house, to come to his great banquet, to come. There are problems sometimes. And Jesus tells us to overlook the problems. See, when he sent his servant out to poor people and maimed people and blind people and lame people, he knew how people could spin this in the city about his party, and he overlooked it. He knew that there had to be a certain level of faith in his servant to trust him, because I'm asking you to go to people that culturally we say run from. Culturally, we say we don't have any business being with them, but we're going to bring them together into this party, into my house, because this is what God wants. Do you know that God has a vision for his church? He sees it as a place for all people, wealthy people, poor people, maimed people, blind people, and people that can see, and people that ain't maimed, you know, like all of us. People who have a strong faith in him, and people who have been hurt by faith, hurt by church, hurt by religion. All people. The thing we have to be careful of is losing God's heart in this. Otherwise, we will only invite people, watch me, who we think are useful, who we think can contribute something. We'll only invite people who we think want to come to begin with. And I think, not just in this house, but I think many people who would call themselves followers of Jesus, we've overlooked a whole bunch of people because we've sort of duped ourselves into thinking that really the ones that we need are people who can contribute something, people who can help in some way, people who are useful and want to already be here. And the heart of God in this story is pointing us in a completely different direction. Because Jesus was not dropping this idea of all people coming to the Father's party in this story. He didn't just drop it when he walked into the temple and turned over tables and said, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. He didn't just institute this idea in that moment. This idea had been in the heart of God since the beginning. But people, religious people, watch me, they had twisted it. Very specifically, there was this part of Scripture that Jewish people in that day, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they hated. These religious leaders hated him because the Bible was not distributed and people had little copies. They had to come and listen to people tell them about it. They had conveniently massaged out of their communication of the Scripture something that God had placed in there from the beginning, from the prophet Isaiah. Now, they love the prophet Isaiah. They love the prophet Isaiah talking about the Messiah that will come. They just had a picture and a definition of what the Messiah would look like. He didn't look like Jesus, so that's why they rejected him. They had this idea of things, and they loved Isaiah. They just did not like Isaiah 25. So much so that if you were to read Jewish cultural accounts and histories of this time period, and there are theological works that are written by people who did not believe in Jesus, but yet were devout Jews in this time, you will find this twisting. And the twisting had to do with a certain little part in Isaiah 25 that was actually talking about God's kingdom. It was talking about, watch me, this will all connect right here. It was talking about a banquet that God was going to throw. A banquet that was going to happen. And this banquet would be full of the finest drinks and the finest meats and the finest everything. And it was going to be this great celebration of God and who God was. And this was going to go on for all eternity, Isaiah wrote about. And they loved that. They just didn't like this one little part. Because in this picture of this banquet, God says that my house will be a house of prayer for all peoples. That's what he said. Jesus didn't just pull that line out of the air. He quoted Isaiah authentically. And then it goes on and it says the Lord who gathers Israel's outcasts. In other words, there will be a party where every person who's been overlooked and every person who's been outcast, I'm going to pull them together because they have faith in my son. I'm going to pull them together. And there's going to be this incredible celebration because what I'm not doing just for good people. I'm not doing just for holy people. I'm not doing just for people who have their little act together. I'm doing for all people. And they hated this because that meant that poor people and maimed people and blind people and lame people couldn't come. And guess what? They knew this. So that's why the master sends out his servant. And the last time he sends him with the strongest encouragement. You go make them come. Why does he tell them that? Can you imagine being somebody? Some of you don't even have to imagine. But could you imagine being somebody who felt like an outcast your whole life? You felt like you were the type that never got invited. You were never wanted. You were never allowed to come in. You were never with the in group. A simple invitation will not work for you. I know there are people who, because of maybe how they grew up or because of hurts and struggles they've had, that I could say something as simple as, man, you ought to come over to the house. And I can read in them, they ain't never coming over to my house. Not because they ain't got anything against me or my house. It's because they hear those words, they just don't know if they're true. Because they've never felt welcomed. They've never felt wanted. And so that's why Jesus here, telling this story, says that the master tells them to go and you make them come. If you got to take them by the hand and drag them to my party, you do that. Because I want them to know they are welcome here. And I believe that's God's vision for you and for me and for us. That we are to be people who will pursue people who are overlooked. And not just offer these soft, sobby invitations, but recognize that some of the people in our world who are far from God but near to us have so much baggage and so much hurt and so much push away. And some of it's been done face to face. And some of it's been done from stuff that people write on the Twitters, but they say that they're a Christian, but then they write crap that doesn't look at all like a Christian. And they just have problems. And so when you tell them that you want them to come, they just have problems really believing it's true. And so you got to take them by the hand and compel them to come so that his vision can become our reality. You see, God's vision, write it down, becoming our reality requires our hustle. This picture that God has, this picture that Jesus painted in this incredible story, becoming our reality, requires you and me to hustle. Somebody shout hustle. Yeah. So we got to hustle. I believe now is the time to hustle. So what we got to do? Well, very practically, quickly and simply, I want to give you 3 simple things before we leave this room today. Because I believe we're supposed to leave here as people who hustle. We're supposed to leave here as people who will commit ourselves to reaching people who are overlooked, reaching people who typically feel like they have no place in church, to let them know they are loved by God. They are loved by us. That this is a church for all people because that's in the heart of our Father. So what do we got to do? Write this down. Here's the first one. Let's prepare the party. Before the master could send the servant out, the party had to get ready. And guess who got the party ready? The servant, you know? The servant did. The servant was the one who put the table arrangements out. The servant was the one who got the music set up. That was the servant. And I believe this is an opportunity for all of us to be people who step in and lean in and say, we're going to be people who prepare the party. What's that mean? Can I tell you that means that if you're here and you love Jesus, you're here and this is your church. You're like, I'm regular here. You told me I was. Once every 2 months, I'm regular. All right, let's go. Then what we need is this. We need you to step in. Find a place to serve. Join us for Start. Next week, we'll help you get connected to that place to serve. Today, you can learn about growing spiritually. Take a step and do something. Get involved here. Help prepare what God is doing here. Let's be people who do something, people who prepare the party. You can jump on our website. You heard it in the news. Leon was talking about it a minute ago. You can jump on our website, click on that little banner and sign up, and boom, we can connect you to a team by next Sunday. Let's jump in. Some of you have a desire or the ability to host a group and to help people connect and come together. It's time for us to prepare the party. Step in and let's do that together. Let's prepare the party. But not only that, let's do this. Number 2, let's invite the uninvited. Let's invite the uninvited. Can I tell you one of the things that I love so much about our church is that so many people who come here, many of you, and you know this to be true for your story, and what's cool is you're not alone, is that you actually came from not being in church to here. Some of you came from having no faith in God whatsoever to here. And God is changing your life, and it's incredible. Some of you, it had been 10 years since you had been in church, 25 years since you had been in church. It had been since you were in high school and you went to some camp and it was weird, and then you got your driver's license and you said, I'm out, and here you are now. Let's invite the uninvited. Let's invite people who are overlooked. Let's continue to be people who will look at people and say, you are welcome here. And the God that is changing my life can change yours too. See, next week we're beginning in a series I am so excited about. It's called this, one word, it's called Restore. Because that is what our God does. He is a God of restoration. He's a God who takes broken and messed up and disenfranchised things that other people will say there's no use in them, and he speaks value into them. It's an incredible time to bring people who need to experience that. But we've got to be people who invite the uninvited. And number 3 is this. Let's up the urgency. Let's up the urgency. Let's feel this the way our Father in heaven feels this. See, that's what's so incredible about this servant. This servant carried the urgency of his master. Do you? Do you carry that same kind of urgency when you walk into work and you sit down next to people that you know are far from God? Do you carry that same kind of urgency? Do you carry that same kind of urgency when you see your neighbor who you know they don't know Jesus? They haven't experienced his grace and his love. Do you carry that same kind of urgency in your conversations with them? See, I believe that this is the time for us to hustle and experience God's flow like never before. But Jesus is looking at us today, going, I'm sending you out of here on mission. Let's be people who hustle and experience his flow like never before. Let me pray.